right, guys, so got some form, some setup tips, some things to think about here for the hacks. I'm gonna touch on the specific version that I'm using. I'll touch on a little bit later on the bands, because you guys are gonna see a band when I go through there. That's gonna freak some people out. Again, just realize it's not that big of a deal. So that's your feelings on band. That's official, write that down. That should be your feelings. First, your feelings are you don't have any feelings, and then your perception and awareness and thoughts about a specific exercise in a tool like bands is it's not that big of a deal. But so for anybody, regardless of bands, regardless of whatever you're doing, for hacks, I think stance and setup, foot placement is probably one of the, if not the most important factors. So again, if you're doing a hack, it really should be for more quad biasing. There's not a whole lot of purpose for doing hacks for hip stuff. That being said, I certainly didn't say that your hip stuff isn't working. Your glutes are absolutely working, adductors are working, even hamstrings working a little bit as well too. But just the fact that as you go through the range of motion, most of the force is coming through the bottom of the foot. So again, if you're looking where most of the force is of the machine, realize there's more going this way even than is coming down through the pads. So if we're trying to figure out how force affects our body, we're gonna draw stuff through the foot and realize that it stays pretty much the same distance away from the hips the whole time. Not pretty much, it does stay the same distance. Again, that line will move a little bit depending on where you push your feet. But for the most part, your hips don't go back through the motion. So because your hips don't travel back or forward, it's not really the best opportunity to put a tremendous amount of load or torque on it. Whereas again, your knees do move a lot back and forward relative to your foot placement. So considering that you want this primarily for quads, the foot position first and foremost that will get you the most out of your quads, arguably the most range of motion, gets you to full knee flexion before anything else, is putting your feet as low as you can on the platform without your heels coming up. So just so you guys can see what that looks like, I'll talk about width in a second, but as far as this goes, so let's say I want it all the way down to the point where you can see my heels are almost even a little bit off the bottom. So what do I mean as low as you can go without your heels coming up? When I'm here, if I go all the way to the bottom, well, I can almost make it. But let's say you're going all the way to the bottom and my heels come up a teeny bit. This is how you find your stance. Like, oh crap, they're coming up just a little bit. What do? Come to the top, take your feet a teeny bit higher on the platform. And this will be different on a lot of platforms. A lot of platforms go a lot lower. So again, if you're taking them really low, you start to go down, your heels come right up. That means you probably have them too low, but I'd rather start too low to find it. And then once you have that set in place, walk them up a little bit. And as you can see, when I drop down in now, I can keep my heel nicely in place, not peeling up throughout the range of motion. So that's step one. Put your feet as low as you can to start. And then from there, if your heels start to come up, just slowly slide them a little bit higher, half an inch at a time, until you find that sweet spot where you can go all the way to the bottom, again, without your heel coming off of the ground. And again, with where the sled is, that will get you to full knee flexion faster than as if you put your feet higher. If you put your feet high enough, you can't actually get to full knee flexion in this exercise. From there, thinking about how you're pressing with your feet is important as well too. So you really want even pressure through your feet. You don't, just because I said you don't want your heel coming up, doesn't mean more pressure through the heel. You want pretty even pressure through the heel, through the outside of your foot, and through all of your toes. If you can spread your toes, great. Feel like they're pressing in and gripping to the ground. From there, for setup, the last thing that I'll say as far as feet is concerned is find your comfortable width where your hips move fine. Again, the structure of everyone's hip, where your acetabulum, the way that your hip basically joint faces, the way that femur actually sits in your pelvis, that's different from person to person. So some people can take a stance like this, very narrow, and they can go all the way to the bottom just fine. Some people are going to feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit wider, toes turned slightly out. Does this change a little bit at your hips? Yes, but you don't want your hips to limit you from getting to full knee flexion. I keep saying full knee flexion. The goal of this exercise, in my opinion, is to get your hamstring touching your calf. That's going to be full knee flexion, where you run out tissue on tissue, training quad where it's basically fully lengthened. The last thing is contact on the pad here. So you absolutely want to have most of the pressure pushing up into the shoulder pads and some pressure pushing back into the pad as well too, maintaining the same positions of contact. So the top of your pelvis should be touching the back pad the whole time, lightly pressing back into that as well too, not jamming back in, but pressing the top of your pelvis back in. And then realize it's going to be a little bit different for most people where your back actually contacts. So some people, natural, a little arch in your lower back is natural, that's a neutral spine. So if there's a little bit of arch where your lower back's not making contact with the pad, that's fine. Some people will actually press in, that's also fine. Whatever position is your neutral, right when you kind of get in and set it there, you want to keep it there the whole time. So you don't want to arch as you go through, or you don't want to go from a slight arch to rounded and pressed in. So once you kind of have all that set up, it's relatively hard to mess up from there. Find your feet, get them as low as you can, find your stance, get good contact through the shoulder pads all the way through the back pad, and just maintain those contact points through the entire range of motion. Next, I'll give you a couple little tips basically on things to think about through the range of motion, through the exercise, what to focus on contracting and doing most of the work to get hopefully the most out of your quads and not have other stuff taken over. All right, so I said I'd talk about bands, and here we go. People are gonna feel some feels about some bands. So again, first off, take a deep breath in and out the nose, and realize again, what's our truth about bands? One, we don't feel feelings about exercises. We don't feel feelings about tools, right? Say it again with me. No feels, team no feels. Be like the same as feeling weird about a screwdriver or a wrench or something like that. Bands are the same thing, just a tool. So again, I've talked about this before. I've got other videos that cover it a little bit more in depth. Again, this is nothing that I made up, but realize that when you are training, your muscles manage torque around joints. How much torque there is around the joint. Again, a little bit with muscle length plays in there too, but basically it's how hard an exercise is. And so realize that again, torque is made up of load in your hands, and moment arms. And again, I hate using that word because people think I'm trying to sound smart, but just do a little Google, not a big deal, not that complicated, something that's been people have been aware of for decades. People have been using accommodating resistance for decades. From the bodybuilding world, it really comes down to efficiency. The whole reason you're in here grabbing stuff, picking stuff up, doing stuff, is to demand force production from your muscles. With properly set up bands and chains, accommodating resistance on the right exercises, you're basically just making a range of motion more efficient, more force production through the entire range of motion. So again, the example I always use that's quick and easy is imagine a dumbbell lateral raise. If I do a dumbbell lateral raise and I move right here for 6 inches, it's a lot easier than if I take the same weight dumbbell and I go up here and I move it 6 inches. The reason for that difference is moment arms. Moment arms, there's a line of force that's made from that weight. Again, if I'm using a weight, it's gonna be gravity. The closer that is to the trained joint, the easier it is. So again, imagine a line going right here, stacked through the joint. So again, because it's basically horizontal distance close to the joint, it's easy. Now it's that far away, it's really hard. So again, everybody has awareness of moment arms. That's the reason you do a lateral raise. If somebody's at a gym doing a lateral raise with 60-pound dumbbells like this, it's not that hard, you see it all the time. If somebody's at the gym doing lateral raises with the 60-pound dumbbells like this, I'm gonna stop and stare because that's impressive as hell. So that's all that we're doing. It's just being aware that as you go through a range of motion, torque changes. So when you're going through like a squat or a deadlift, those are patterns where there's a lot of change from the bottom to the top. And the short changes at the bottom, there's a shit ton of torque on the trained muscles. In this case particularly, we're gonna look at the knees as far as the quads are influenced, but change at the hips as well too. But there's a lot of torque at the bottom, and as you come closer and closer to the top, that line of force gets closer to the trained joint, the knee, torque decreases, it gets easier. So again, if someone cheats on a squat, where do they cheat? Everyone just does the short range of motion at the top. No one ever cheats and does all their squats at the bottom. It's because it's hard as hell down there. So when you put bands on something like a hack, the whole point is because moment arms are gonna change regardless, as you go through it. So what can we do to offset that to keep torque higher is we can make the load heavier at the top and lighter at the bottom. That's the whole point of bands. And the more load you're using, the more significant the change needs to be. So at the bottom, I wanted a lighter weight. At the top, I want it significantly heavier. The two ways to accomplish that are like this setup here, bands from the top. So if you think about it, when you watch and I'm going through some reps here, at the top, these bands should be, I didn't set them up, but they should be completely slack. So that means I'm lifting however much weight is actually on the sled. When I go down to the bottom, it's probably taking off 150, 200 pounds as I go to the bottom. And that's really what we're trying to do, is create that difference from bottom to top. So if you put bands from the top, you're gonna have overall more weight on the sled than you normally would with no bands if you had to do the same thing. The other way to do it is bands from the bottom. So you can have the same effect. So again, imagine when I go to the bottom, if I have bands set up pulling from the bottom, I want those bands relaxed when I'm at the bottom of the range of motion. And as I come to the top, they stretch and they put more force on, has the same effect. So again, it's gonna be the weight that's actually on the sled you're using at the bottom As you come up and those bands stretch, it's gonna get heavier and heavier and heavier and a heavier load at the top. So that's really what you're trying to do. Why would you do from bands from the top, bands from the bottom? For me, the number one reason is semantics, whichever is easier to set up. So if you look at this specific piece, there's nowhere great to put them from the bottom. Some hacks actually have pegs now out the top, at the bottom. You can take them out from there so they don't get in the way of your knees or your hips or range of motion, and loop them to the top. So again, from the top to the bottom, doesn't really matter. Properly set up, you can have a significant load change from top to bottom. That being said, if this is a pain in the ass for you, you don't feel like bothering with it, you don't feel like setting you up, it stresses you out, it makes you grumpy, then don't do it. It's just more efficient compared to not using bands. Without bands, it's still a great exercise. You can still get freaking huge. Yes, Ronnie Coleman never used bands and it seemed to work out for him all right, but just realize you're not Ronnie Coleman. So maybe efficiency is gonna be a good thing for you. So again, if you set it up properly, great tool. Do some people set it up improperly? Yes, of course. People do everything wrong in the gym. Something that could be right. Someone's gonna set 1,200 bands on here so they can put 47 plates on the side and look good for the gram. That's not what I'm recommending doing. I'm recommending setting them up properly. And again, properly should be, if it's set up from the top, they should be slack when you're at the very top of the range of motion and stretched as you come to the bottom. And the inverse, if you set them up from the bottom. If you set them up from the bottom, the band should be slack, completely slack when you're at the bottom of the range of motion, and obviously at their tightest when they come from the top. All right, guys, so last little tips here to think about when you're actually going to maybe get a little bit more out of it. For the most part, master your setup, master those contact points, make sure that the only things moving are the joints you're training. You know, from there, a lot of it truly is about controlling the range of motion, making sure you're using your muscles the whole time. So controlled eccentrics, controlled direction changes. So out of the bottom, make sure you're using your quads to change direction, not using momentum, not bouncing. And then from there, there's a couple little things you can focus on. So as you're going through, one of the big things I'll find a lot of people, if you have a tendency for something else to take over, glutes, adductors, whatever, a little tip you can do to get more out of it is think about what you're doing with your feet. So again, line of force, when you have a machine like this, is not always straight up and down. How you press your foot in the platform changes things too. So if you want a little trick, a little hack for the hack, is as you're coming out of the bottom, feel like you're slightly sliding your foot up. So again, without it actually moving, just imagine if this was ice, as you're coming from the bottom, feel like you're trying to slide your foot up a little bit, which also kind of feels like a leg extension-y type thing. What that actually does is it changes the direction of force a little bit to create a little bit more torque at the knee. It actually changes the mechanics of the exercise and will create more torque at the knee for a given same load. So again, if you're doing hacks, you don't normally feel your quads a whole lot, take some time to practice that first. Just don't try it for the first time on a working set. On your warm-up sleds, work on slow eccentrics, work on owning that bottom range of motion. And then right when you initiate out of the bottom, feel like you're trying to leg extension, feel like you're trying to slide the foot up the platform, whatever. Practice that, be extra slow with it, and see how you actually feel your quads recruiting different from normal stuff. Aside from that, like I said, just want to get the most out of your hacks. Try and keep your last reps looking like the first. That's the most simple way that I can keep it for something relatively complex. Most people just shit the bed on the reps that matter most. And again, regardless of whether you think training to failure is best for you, training a few reps short of failure, which obviously has a place depending on your training age, training goal, wherever you're at as far as beginner or advanced. But one way or the other, whether you're training to failure, whether you're training 2-3 reps in reserve, the last reps are the most important. So again, a lot of people will do a set of 8. The first 5 look great, and then on the last 3, they're dropping the eccentrics, they're bouncing out of the bottom, everything else is moving around. You're not getting the desired training effect on the muscle you're trying to train. You're just switching from moving to A to B as easy as possible. So again, when you're going through hacks, especially once you properly set up bands. Again, people feel some feels about bands. The only feel that people have about bands, if I set them up properly and I take them through a set, is just death for their quads. The only people that shit talk bands on a hack are people that have not had me take them through sets on it. Once you do it properly, it's so much harder than normal hacks. And again, people that know the type of good pain they want in the gym, it's that good type of pain. It's fucking brutal. So when you're going through it, especially with bands. Control the centrics, if anything, a little bit of a pause at the bottom. Mess around with that foot thing if you have a hard time feeling your quads. And again, just try and keep that last rep looking exactly like your first reps, and you're gonna get the most benefit out of the exercise. All right, so wrapping up while I'm still breathing excessively. So again, the other beauty of hacks, as you can see from there, is even if you don't have a spotter, you can take it all the way to failure. And then worst case scenario, I think you guys just saw the very first half of it. You sit it down, and then I just kind of rolled sideways out of the machine, laid there in the fetal position, and cried for a little while. And my mom came and got me. And now I'm here. But no, seriously. So it's nice. I mean, it's nice to have a place where you can take, because this is a difference too. People say free weight squats, barbell squats are king. And obviously those are great exercises, but there's advantages and disadvantages to everything. And so here is a place you can take a set all the way and not at least die. Worst case, you just roll out on the gym floor, and the custodial will come and just kind of mop you out of the way for the next person. And anyway, last pro tip, very important stuff I was thinking about while I was doing this. It's always important to check your pants before you go. If you got a hole in your pants. I got a hole in my pants, but if you double check and you don't have a hole in your underwear, then you're good to go. So that's a little hashtag pro tip. Way too much information. Somebody unsubscribed right now. Somebody subscribed for that though too. So you win some, you lose some. But anyway, hopefully, in all seriousness, you guys find those tips helpful. And again, as all of it, take what's valuable. The Bruce Lee saying, absorb what's useful, reject the rest. Something along the lines of that, a little bit more articulate and looks cooler when it's with a black and white picture of him doing something cool, meme style. But anyway, take some valuable stuff, mess around with it, try it for your next workout. As all of this, it's only as valuable as it is applicable. It's only as valuable as it helps improve your training and ultimately improves your results. So same as any other video, if you like, hit me that little thumbs up. If you don't follow, hit that subscribe. I'm trying to be way more consistent with my content coming up. And the best compliment you can ever give me if you like my content is share. So share it with somebody. I get a lot of people that comment, this YouTube channel should be way better. I agree. So tell some people about it, and I'll try and keep pumping out the content for you guys. As always, appreciate the support. Till the next one.